Right now, there is a conversation happening about Social Security that almost nobody is paying close attention to, but it could quietly change how retirement works in America for decades. The idea sounds simple on the surface. Place a limit on how much someone can receive from Social Security. Roughly $50,000 a year for individuals and about $100,000 for married couples. And honestly, when most people hear that, the reaction is usually the same. Well, yeah, Social Security isn't supposed to make people wealthy. But here's the part that doesn't get explained. The people who would hit numbers like this aren't lottery winners or overnight success stories. They're often workers who paid into the system at the highest level for 30 or 40 years straight. So this proposal raises a much bigger question, one that goes beyond just dollars and cents. Is Social Security still based on what you contribute, or is it slowly becoming something entirely different? Because depending on how changes like this are structured, today's small adjustment could become tomorrow's new rule for everyone. Let's unpack what's actually going on.
All right, so let's pull back the curtain a little, because Social Security benefits are not random, and they're definitely not based on your last salary. There's actually a formula behind the scenes, and once you understand it, a lot of these policy debates suddenly make way more sense. First, Social Security looks at something called your highest 35 years of earnings. Not your best year, not your last job, your top 35 earning years, adjusted for inflation. So if you worked fewer than 35 years, those missing years don't disappear. They count as zeros. Yeah, zeros. Which means even a few years out of the workforce can quietly lower your future benefit. Now, after those earnings are adjusted, the system calculates what's known as your average indexed monthly earnings, or AIME. And this is where things get interesting, because Social Security doesn't replace everyone's income equally. It's actually designed to replace a larger percentage of income for lower earners and a smaller percentage for higher earners. In other words, the system is progressive by design.
And now the real question begins. Should benefits scale with earnings, or should there be a limit?
Now, this is where things get complicated, and where opinions start splitting fast. Because depending on who you ask, this proposal looks completely different. Some people look at the idea of capping benefits and say, yeah, that makes sense. Their argument is that Social Security was never meant to create six-figure retirements. It was designed to prevent poverty in old age, not replace high incomes forever. From that perspective, putting a ceiling on benefits isn't unfair. It's returning the system to what it was originally meant to do. But then you've got another group who sees this very differently. They argue that if someone paid the maximum payroll taxes for 30 or 40 years straight, they didn't do anything wrong. They followed the rules, contributed at the highest level possible, and planned their retirement around the system as it exists today. So from their point of view, suddenly putting a limit on what they can receive doesn't feel like a policy tweak. It feels like changing the rules after the game has already been played. And then there's a third perspective that sits somewhere in the middle. This view says there's no perfect fix. Keeping Social Security sustainable long-term might require a mix of changes. Maybe higher taxes, maybe adjustments to benefits, maybe even a later retirement age. Not one single solution, but a combination of trade-offs. And this is the part most people skip over. Because the real debate isn't just about dollars and numbers. It's about what Social Security is supposed to be. Is it a system where what you pay in determines what you get out? Or is it becoming more like a safety net based on need? Because the answer to that question changes everything. And once you see it from that angle, the proposal stops being about a single number and starts becoming a much bigger conversation.
Now, to really understand why proposals like this make people uneasy, we need to look at something that's already happened before. Because this wouldn't be the first time a change was introduced that seemed small at the time, but grew into something much bigger over the years. Let's go back for a second. When Social Security benefits were first created, they weren't taxed at all. Zero. Whatever you received, you kept. But that changed in the early 1980s. At that point, a reform was introduced that allowed up to 50% of your Social Security benefits to be taxed, but only if your income crossed certain thresholds. And when this was first put into place, it was expected to affect a very small percentage of retirees, mostly higher income households. Then about a decade later, another adjustment was added. Now up to 85% of benefits could be subject to taxation. Again, only above certain income levels. Still targeted, still limited. But here's the part most people don't realize. Those income thresholds were never adjusted for inflation, not once. So over time, as incomes naturally increased and benefits slowly grew, more and more retirees started crossing those same thresholds. What originally applied to a small group of higher earners gradually expanded to include a much larger portion of the population.
And today, a significant percentage of retirees end up paying taxes on their Social Security benefits. Not because the rule changed dramatically, but because the thresholds stayed exactly the same. Now, why does that matter for this conversation? Because when you look at proposals like a benefit cap, the details of how it's implemented matter just as much as the idea itself. If something like this is introduced and stays fixed over time, then as wages grow and benefits increase, more people could slowly get pulled into that limit. Not all at once, but gradually, quietly, almost the same way it happened with benefit taxation. Now, to be fair, some versions of proposals like this do include adjustments for inflation, and that would help slow this effect down. But even then, there's another layer to think about. Because historically, wages tend to grow faster than inflation, which means even if the cap increases over time, it might not keep pace with how benefits themselves evolve. And that creates a subtle shift. A policy that starts by affecting a small group today could end up reaching a much broader group in the future. And that's the real concern for a lot of people. It's not just about what the rule does right now, it's about what it could turn into over time.
At the end of the day, this isn't really about one proposal. It's about the direction Social Security could be heading over time. Because every change, even the ones that seem small, adds up. And over the years, those small adjustments can slowly reshape the entire system. Now, that doesn't mean every proposal is bad, and it doesn't mean major changes are guaranteed to happen tomorrow. But it does mean something important. It means the system isn't fixed. It evolves. And the decisions being discussed today could influence how retirement looks for decades to come. Which is why understanding how these policies work matters more than ever. Not just reacting to headlines, but actually breaking down what they mean. Because once you understand the mechanics behind the system, you start to see things differently.
You start to connect the dots. And more importantly, you start asking better questions. Like, what kind of system do we actually want moving forward? One that strictly rewards what you put in? Or one that adjusts based on broader goals? Because there's no version of this where nothing changes at all. Something will give. The only real question is where, and who it affects the most. And that's why conversations like this matter. Not because one proposal decides everything, but because it gives us a glimpse into where things might be going. So instead of reacting too quickly, take a step back and think about what makes the most sense to you. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just policy. It's your future.